Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast, where we talk about everything dog. Q&As with veterinarian professionals, rescue operators, everyday topics. We cover everything dog on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media on both Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Now here's that next episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast. This is your host, Brittany, and today we were going to talk about heartworms. So, heartworm prevention is very simple, but at the same time, it is extremely important. So, heartworms are essentially a disease or an infection, if you will, that can affect your dog. And if your dog does get heartworm disease, it actually can take some time before you recognize those symptoms. It does take time for those heartworms to grow. So with that, more often than not, heartworm disease could be fatal. And even if it's not fatal, it could have a pretty serious prognosis. So it's treatable, but that is assuming you take the actual steps to treat it. So let's kind of start with the beginning of heartworms. So heartworms generally are spread by mosquitoes. So if your pet is bit by a mosquito, they could get heartworm disease if they're not on a preventative. So heartworm disease has been found in all 50 states in the United States. So, every state has mosquitoes. Now, even though there is a difference in climate, a difference in when mosquitoes are active, it does seem that most vets agree that your dog should be on a heartworm preventative year-round. We are in Florida, so our dogs are on heartworm preventative year-round. I know some people who maybe live pretty north where it might snow in the winter and they don't have mosquitoes. They might pause it for a few months. That's totally at your discretion, whatever risk level you are happy with. And so basically with heartworms and heartworm preventatives, the way you would kind of start on that prevention is puppies can normally start that heartworm prevention around 6 or 7 months of age. Ordinarily, if you're starting your puppy at that age, you're not going to be testing them for heartworms. Like I said, it does take a lot of time for those heartworms to kind of progress, to see those symptoms. And so as a puppy, you're not going to test them yet. So you would start them on that heartworm preventative. And then from there, you would get them tested annually. Now, if you ever adopt a dog that's a little bit older, or you rescue a dog, or you find a stray, whatever it might be, one of the first steps you probably want to do is go in for a heartworm test and then get that preventative prescribed. So the different preventatives, they do have to be prescribed by your vet, and your vet has to be the one that does that heartworm testing. But there's a number of different preventatives. There are different topical preventatives. There are oral, so little tablets or little chews. There's even some medications that might help with several different things. So, for example, you might find a heartworm preventative that also has a flea preventative, maybe also a tick preventative. So there's quite a few options out there. Most of the options are pretty inexpensive. So while this is preventative in nature, also that there's a cost benefit analysis here. It's also cheaper to just prevent heartworm disease from the get-go rather than having to treat it down the road. So if you found out your dog had heartworm disease, maybe you rescue a dog or you adopt a dog. I know in Florida, a lot of the dogs that were found as strays, or if they're dumped, they do have heartworm disease, and it can be treated most of the time. There are several different methods. You might have heard the method of slow kill, the method of fast kill. That's going to be at the discretion of your vet as well. Nevertheless, if your dog did get heartworm disease, you would make sure that they did start on that preventative. So they are going to start a preventative moving forward, and then whatever treatment option your vet might give you. Something else to kind of think about: if you do adopt or rescue a heartworm positive dog, your dog does get heartworms, it's really important to restrict their exercise. So you just want to decrease those physical activities, because physical exertion can increase the rate at which heartworms cause damage in the heart and lungs. So that's something kind of important to think about. So while there are a number of dogs who have made it successfully through heartworm treatment, it is important to think about if you are going to go down that route with your dog to restrict that overall activity. So you are administering treatment, you're reducing activity, and you're stabilizing their disease overall. So there are some different myths, kind of like I said before. There's a myth that you don't need heartworm preventative unless you live in a warm climate, and that is not true. So just as I said before, heartworms have been found in all 50 states. So this is important to everyone in the United States. Now, I know I have some listeners from other countries, very few that don't have mosquitoes. So you guys might not have to worry about this. But I know for the United States, it is a big issue here. And one of the easiest things as a dog owner that you can prevent. So would love to hear from you guys if you've heard any kind of heartworm myths or anything else you're kind of doing, maybe some new treatment options that you're working on. So feel free to write into us, canineculturepodcast@gmail.com. And as always, thank you guys for listening and supporting the podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you guys. Talk to you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Canine Culture Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any recommendations, any topics that you'd like to hear, if you know of any guests that would be good for the show, or if you yourself want to be a guest, please reach out to us. Send us an email at canineculturepodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message on social media. Thank you for listening, and please share this with any of your dog-loving friends.